Commander Jake Harrison sat in the quiet control room of Luna Base, watching the endless stream of data flow across his screens. The night shift always felt longer than the day shift, but someone had to monitor the deep space communication arrays. While Earth slept, Jake had been doing this job for 3 years now, ever since the Defense Force promoted him after the Mars incident. Most nights were boring, filled with routine maintenance reports and supply requests from the outer colonies. Tonight felt different, though. Jake noticed a weak signal coming from the far edge of sensor range, somewhere beyond the outer planets. The signal was not like anything he had seen before. It was not from any human ship or station. The patterns were wrong, the frequency was strange, and there was something desperate about the way it pulsed through space. Jake called over Lisa Martinez, the best communications specialist on the base. Lisa had magic fingers when it came to cleaning up bad signals. She could pull meaning from static that would drive other technicians crazy. When Jake showed her the signal, her eyes went wide with excitement and worry. Lisa worked for 2 hours, running the signal through every filter, an enhancement program they had. Slowly, piece by piece, she pulled words from the noise. The words were in human language, but spoken with an accent that no human throat could make. The voice was high and musical, like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, but underneath the beauty was pure terror. The message was short but clear. The speaker called themselves Kaleri, from a world called Velonis Prime. They said their people were dying under attack from something called the Vorthan Empire. The Kaleri had heard stories about humans, about how they were warriors who protected the weak. They begged for help, offering coordinates to their world, 300 light-years from Earth. Jake felt his hands shake as he recorded the message. This was first contact with alien life, but not the peaceful meeting that scientists had always imagined. This was a cry for help from across the galaxy. He looked at Lisa, who was staring at the speakers with tears in her eyes. The fear and pain in that alien voice was something that crossed all species barriers. Jake reached for the emergency communication link to Earth. This was way above his pay grade. Within minutes, he was talking to Admiral Charles Brooks, who had been pulled from his bed in Colorado Springs. Jake played the message 3 times while the Admiral listened in complete silence. When it finished, Admiral Brooks was quiet for a long moment. The Admiral ordered Jake to secure the signal and say nothing to anyone else. Within an hour, emergency shuttles were launching from Earth toward Luna Base. Jake watched through the observation windows as military officials he had only seen on news broadcasts arrived at his small monitoring station. Dr. Amanda Foster arrived with the first shuttle. She was the smartest person Jake had ever met, the kind of scientist who could look at data and see patterns that others missed. Dr. Foster took one look at the alien signal and confirmed what Jake already knew in his heart. This was real. Somewhere in space, an alien species was calling for help, and they had specifically asked for humans. Captain Ryan Cooper came with the second shuttle. Jake had heard stories about Cooper from other Defense Force personnel. The man was a legend, someone who had fought pirates in the asteroid belt and never lost a battle. Cooper listened to the alien message with the focused attention of a professional soldier. When it ended, he asked only one question. How long would it take to get there? The control room filled with people as more officials arrived. President Catherine Stone herself appeared on the main communication screen, calling in from the White House Situation Room. Jake found himself in the middle of the most important meeting in human history, still wearing his rumpled night shift uniform. Dr. Foster explained what she could learn from the message. The Kaleri seemed to be a peaceful species, probably not much more advanced than humans in terms of technology. The Vorthan Empire was clearly the aggressor, and from the desperation in the alien voice, the attack was going badly for the defenders. The coordinates were real and pointed to a star system that human telescopes had cataloged but never studied closely. Captain Cooper presented the military options. Humanity had been building up its space fleet for years, ever since the colonial wars proved that conflict would follow humans to the stars. The ships were ready, the crews were trained, and the weapons were tested. What they did not have was experience fighting aliens or traveling such vast distances. Admiral Brooks raised the biggest concern. If humans helped the Kaleri, they would be taking sides in an alien war. There was no way to know how powerful the Vorthan Empire really was or whether helping their enemies would make Earth a target. But if they did nothing, an entire species might die while calling out for help that never came. President Stone made the decision that would change human history forever. She authorized the mobilization of Earth's entire space fleet for humanity's first interstellar military mission. The Kaleri had asked for warriors, and Earth would send them the best fighters the human race could offer. Jake watched as orders went out across the solar system. Ships began moving toward the Luna shipyards. Crews were called up from leave, and weapons were loaded onto transport vessels. In less than 72 hours, humanity would launch its greatest military expedition ever. All because of a desperate message from the stars that Jake had happened to notice during a quiet night shift. As the officials prepared to leave Luna Base, Captain Cooper stopped by Jake's station. The captain looked at the young commander and said something that Jake would remember for the rest of his life. Cooper told him that because of his sharp eyes and quick thinking, humanity might be able to save an entire alien civilization. That was the kind of responsibility that made heroes out of ordinary people. Jake looked out at the stars and wondered what they would find when they reached Velonis Prime. Whatever it was, humanity was coming, and they were bringing everything they had. The Luna shipyards had never seen activity like this before. Ships arrived from every corner of human space, their engines glowing against the black backdrop of space as they took positions around the massive orbital construction platforms. Captain Ryan Cooper stood on the bridge of his ship, the UES Thunderstrike, and watched as humanity's greatest military assets assembled for the first time in one place. The Thunderstrike was an experimental warship, built with the latest human technology and designed for long-range combat missions. Cooper had commanded her for 2 years, fighting pirates and rebels in the asteroid fields where conventional ships could not operate. His crew knew their business, and their ship had never failed them in battle. But this mission was different. From anything they had faced before, the massive dreadnought U's Vengeance took position near the center of the formation. Captain Patricia Lee commanded that ship, and Cooper respected her more than any other officer in the fleet. Lee had earned her reputation during the Mars colonial wars, where her tactical genius had saved thousands of civilian lives. The Vengeance was the most powerful warship humanity had ever built. Armed with enough firepower to level a small moon, Lieutenant Commander Alex Turner brought his stealth destroyer UA Shadow to the fleet gathering. Turner was young but deadly. Smart, the kind of officer who thought 3 moves ahead of his enemies. The Shadow was built for reconnaissance and surprise attacks, capable of appearing from nowhere to strike at enemy weak points. Cooper had worked with Turner before and trusted him completely. 12 other warships joined the main battle group, each one representing the best of human military engineering. There were heavy cruisers with thick armor plating, fast attack, ships with experimental weapons, and support vessels loaded with supplies for a long campaign. Together, they formed the most powerful space fleet humanity had ever assembled, the troop transport. U's Guardian carried the ground forces that would be needed if the mission required planetary assault. Marine Colonel Danny Phillips commanded those forces, and his reputation was legendary throughout the Defense Force. Phillips had fought in every major conflict of the past decade, from the Titan Rebellion to the Europa mining strikes. His Marines called him Iron Danny because nothing seemed to break his determination. Sergeant Major Carol Bennett was Phillips' senior enlisted officer, a woman who had earned her rank through 20 years of combat service. Bennett had trained more soldiers than anyone else in the corps, and her former students could be found commanding units throughout human space. She ran the Marine training programs with an iron fist and a sharp eye for detail. Lieutenant Kevin Murphy was one of the younger Marine officers, but he had already proven himself in the brutal fighting around the outer colonies. Murphy specialized in urban combat and assault tactics, the kind of close-quarters fighting that broke lesser soldiers. His men followed him because they knew he would never ask them to do anything he would not do himself. Dr. Amanda Foster established her xenology department aboard the fleet flagship UES Liberty. Fleet Admiral Nathan Price commanded the Liberty and the entire expedition. Price was a careful planner who never rushed into battle without understanding his enemy first. He wanted Dr. Foster's team to learn everything possible about both the aliens they hoped to save and the enemies they expected to fight. Dr. Rebecca Taylor joined Foster's team as the chief linguist. Taylor had spent her career studying human languages and communication patterns, but alien contact would test her skills in ways she had never imagined. She brought every translation program and linguistic analysis tool that Earth science could provide. Professor Gary Lewis was the cultural analyst for the expedition. Lewis had studied human societies throughout history, looking for patterns in how different groups made war and peace. He hoped that alien cultures might follow similar patterns, but he was prepared for anything. Chief Engineer Maria Santos supervised the last-minute installation of new weapon systems across the fleet. Santos had designed many of the experimental weapons herself, working from captured pirate technology and theoretical physics that pushed the limits of human science. Her plasma cannons could punch through any armor that humans had ever tested, and her kinetic bombardment systems could reduce cities to rubble. Intelligence. Officer Lieutenant Nicole Carter briefed the fleet commanders on everything they knew about the Vorthan Empire. Carter was a master at reading between the lines of incomplete information, building complete pictures from scattered pieces of data. What she had learned from the Kaleri message worried her greatly. The Vorthans seemed to be a military empire built around conquest and expansion. Their technology appeared to be roughly equal to human levels, but they had been fighting wars for much longer than humanity had existed in space. They used energy weapons and had ships designed specifically for planetary bombardment. Most importantly, they seemed to have no interest in negotiation or mercy. Carter's analysis suggested that the Vorthans would see human intervention as an act of war. There would be no diplomatic solution once the shooting started. The fleet would have to be prepared for a fight to the finish against an enemy that had been conquering other species for centuries. The final preparations took 3 days of around-the-clock work. Weapons were tested and retested, supplies were loaded and secured, and crews ran through combat drills until they could fight in their sleep. The Marine units practiced boarding actions and planetary assault techniques, while the ship crews rehearsed fleet maneuvers and targeting procedures. Admiral Price held his final briefing in the Liberty's main conference room. Every ship captain and department head attended, either in person or through secure communication links. Price laid out the mission parameters with military precision. They would travel to the Valonis system using the fastest route possible, assess the tactical situation, and engage the Vorthan forces with maximum effectiveness. The Admiral made one thing perfectly clear to every person under his command. This was not a rescue mission where they could afford to be careful. The Kaleri had called for help because they were losing badly. By the time the human fleet arrived, the alien defenders might be down to their last few strongholds. There would be no time for cautious approaches or lengthy reconnaissance. Captain Cooper returned to the Thunderstrike as the fleet prepared for departure. His crew was ready, his ship was armed and fueled, and his orders were clear. Humanity was about to travel farther from Earth than any human had ever gone, to fight enemies they had never seen for allies they had never met. The departure was broadcast live to every human world and colony. Billions of people watched as their greatest warriors set course for the stars, carrying with them the hopes and prayers of the entire human race. As the ships engaged their faster-than-light drives and disappeared into the void, everyone knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Valonis system, and what they found there made even the most experienced officers draw sharp breaths. The system was a battlefield that stretched across millions of kilometers of space. Burning debris floated where orbital defense stations had once protected the alien homeworld. Strange ships with crimson energy signatures surrounded the planet like predators circling wounded prey. Admiral Nathan Price stood on the bridge of the UES Liberty and studied the tactical display with growing anger. The Vorthan ships were sleek and angular, built for speed and firepower rather than protection. They moved in precise formations that spoke of military discipline and long experience in space combat. Red energy beams lanced down from orbit, striking targets on the planet's surface with methodical brutality. Captain Ryan Cooper counted at least 40 enemy vessels in the immediate area, with more contacts showing up on long-range sensors. The Vorthans had brought enough firepower to crush any normal resistance, but they had not expected humans to arrive. Cooper ordered his weapon systems armed and his crew to battle stations as the Thunderstrike moved into attack position. The planet below showed the scars of orbital bombardment. Huge fires burned across entire continents, and massive craters marked where Vorthan weapons had struck population centers. But there were still signs of life and resistance. Energy signatures indicated that some Kaleri defensive positions were still active, though they were clearly losing the fight. Admiral Price opened a communication channel to the Vorthan fleet commander, hoping that diplomacy might still be possible. His message was simple and direct. He identified himself as the representative of humanity and requested immediate cessation of hostilities against the Kaleri people. He offered to negotiate a peaceful resolution that would allow the Vorthans to withdraw without further conflict. The Vorthan response came not in words but in weapons fire. A dozen crimson energy beams targeted the Liberty, forcing the flagship to take evasive action as alien plasma scorched through the space where she had been floating moments before. The beams were powerful enough to vaporize any ship they hit directly, but human point defense systems managed to deflect most of the incoming fire. Captain Patricia Lee did not wait for orders. The moment the Vorthans opened fire, she brought the UES Vengeance into the battle with all guns blazing. The massive dreadnought's kinetic cannons sent streams of hypervelocity projectiles into the enemy formation, and the results were spectacular. Vorthan energy shields flickered and failed under the hammering impact of solid metal traveling at significant fractions of light speed. The battle erupted across 3 dimensions as human tactics met alien technology in deadly combat. Lieutenant Commander Alex Turner used the Shadow stealth systems to penetrate the Vorthan formation from an unexpected angle. His surprise attack caught 3 enemy ships clustered around a communications array, and his torpedo spread gutted all 3 vessels in a matter of seconds. Captain Cooper brought the Thunderstrike into close-range combat with a Vorthan heavy cruiser that was twice his ship's size. The alien vessel had superior energy weapons, but Cooper's crew had trained for exactly this kind of fight. They used their superior maneuverability to stay inside the enemy's weapon arcs while pounding the larger ship with concentrated firepower. The Vorthans quickly learned that human kinetic weapons were far more effective than they had expected. Their energy shields were designed to deflect plasma beams and particle streams, not solid projectiles moving at relativistic speeds. Human ships that should have been outgunned were punching holes through alien armor and causing massive internal explosions. On the planet's surface, Marine Colonel Danny Phillips led the first human ground assault on an alien world. The UES Guardian had managed to break through the orbital blockade long enough to deploy assault shuttles, and Phillips took his best troops down to help the surviving Kaleri defenders. The planet's gravity was lighter than Earth normal, but the atmosphere was breathable and the terrain was not too different from human worlds. The Marines found themselves fighting in the ruins of what had once been a beautiful city. The Kaleri had built their settlements to blend with the natural landscape, using organic curves and living materials that made their buildings look more grown than constructed. Now those elegant structures were burning under Vorthan attack, and desperate alien defenders fought from improvised positions. Sergeant Major Carol Bennett led her squad through rubble-filled streets toward the sound of gunfire. The Vorthans had deployed ground forces equipped with energy rifles and hover tanks, and they were advancing methodically through the city. Bennett's Marines carried conventional projectile weapons that seemed primitive compared to alien energy beams, but human training and tactics soon proved their worth. Lieutenant Kevin Murphy encountered his first Vorthan ground troops when his Squad rounded a corner and found themselves face to face with an enemy patrol. The Vorthons were tall and thin, with gray skin and large eyes that glowed with an inner light. They moved with predatory grace and carried weapons that hummed with deadly energy. But they had never fought humans before, and they were not prepared. For the fury of Marine Corps' assault tactics, the firefight lasted less than 30 seconds. Human training emphasized speed, aggression, and overwhelming firepower in close combat. While the Vorthons were still raising their energy rifles, Murphys, Marines were already firing, moving, and flanking. The aliens were skilled soldiers, but they fought like individuals while humans fought as a team. Dr. Amanda Foster made first contact with the Kaleri when a group of alien civilians stumbled into the marine perimeter. The Kaleri were unlike anything humans had imagined. They stood about as tall as humans, but had 4 arms and compound eyes that sparkled like jewels. Their skin was covered in fine scales that changed color with their emotions, and they communicated through a combination of musical sounds and telepathic impressions. The Kaleri leader approached Dr. Foster with obvious caution but also desperate hope. Through a combination of gestures, simple words, and direct mental contact, the alien managed to communicate the basic situation. The Vorthons had attacked without warning 3 months ago, demanding complete surrender and threatening to exterminate every Kaleri if they resisted. The peaceful aliens had tried to fight back, but their defensive technology was no match for Vorthon military might. Dr. Foster felt the aliens' emotions through their telepathic link, and what she experienced there nearly brought her to tears. The Kaleri were a species that valued harmony and cooperation above all else. They had never developed serious military technology, because they had never encountered a species that wanted to destroy them simply for existing. They had sent their desperate message to humanity because ancient radio signals had taught them that humans were warriors who protected others. The Kaleri leader shared crucial intelligence about Vorthon weaknesses and the location of their command center. The aliens had observed their attackers carefully, looking for any advantage that might help them survive. They had learned that Vorthon ships relied heavily on their energy weapons and that their ground forces were not as effective in close combat as they appeared. Admiral Price received regular reports from the surface as the space battle continued to rage above the planet. His fleet was holding its own against superior numbers, but more Vorthon ships kept arriving to reinforce their attack force. Human casualties were mounting, and several ships had taken serious damage. The Admiral realized that this was just the opening engagement of what would probably be a much larger conflict, the first battle for Velonis Prime ended when the surviving Vorthon ships retreated to the outer system to await reinforcements. They had lost nearly half their fleet to human weapons and tactics, but they had learned valuable lessons about their new enemies. The humans had won the first round, but everyone knew that the Vorthons would be back with better preparation and overwhelming numbers. Captain Cooper stood on his damaged bridge and looked down at the alien world they had come so far to defend. The Thunderstrike had taken hits that would have destroyed a lesser ship, but his crew had kept her fighting throughout the entire engagement. Now they had time to make repairs and prepare for the next attack, which intelligence reports suggested would come within days. The Vorthon counterattack came sooner than anyone expected. Long-range sensors detected the massive enemy fleet while it was still 2 days out from Velonis Prime, and what the humans saw made even Admiral Nathan Price question whether they could survive the coming battle. 200 Vorthon warships moved through space in perfect formation, led by a command vessel that dwarfed anything the humans had ever built, intelligence. Officer Lieutenant Nicole Carter worked around the clock to analyze the approaching enemy force. The lead ship belonged to Vorthon War Commander Zeth Kar, whose reputation for brutality was known across 3 sectors of the galaxy. Zeth Kar had conquered dozens of species and never accepted anything less than complete surrender. His fleet carried enough firepower to reduce entire planets to molten slag. Admiral Price called an emergency meeting of all ship commanders and senior officers. The human fleet was vastly outnumbered, and conventional tactics would result in their complete destruction within hours. But Price had not come this far to give up without a fight. He ordered the fleet to disperse throughout the asteroid belt that surrounded Velonis Prime, using the rocky debris as cover for guerrilla warfare tactics. Captain Ryan Cooper took the Thunderstrike deep into the asteroid field, where his ship's smaller size and superior maneuverability would give him advantages over larger Vorthan vessels. His crew worked frantically to repair battle damage while preparing for the most desperate fight of their lives. Chief Engineer Maria Santos had managed to jury-rig several new weapon systems using salvaged Kaleri technology and asteroid mining equipment. The asteroids themselves became weapons under Santos' guidance. Human ships could use magnetic grapples and tractor beams to accelerate chunks of rock to incredible velocities, turning them into kinetic projectiles that no shield could deflect. It was primitive compared to energy weapons, but effective in ways that the Vorthans had never encountered before. Captain Patricia Lee positioned the UES Vengeance near the largest asteroid in the belt, using the massive rock formation as both shield and fortress. Her crew had worked for 36 hours straight to repair the Dreadnought's damaged armor and weapon systems. Lee knew that her ship would bear the brunt of the enemy assault, but she was determined to make the Vorthans pay dearly for every meter of space they conquered. On the surface of Velonis Prime, Marine Colonel Danny Phillips established joint command centers with the surviving Kaleri defense forces. The telepathic aliens could coordinate human and Kaleri units with unprecedented precision, sharing tactical information instantly across vast distances. Phillips had never worked with alien soldiers before, but he quickly learned to respect their courage and dedication. Lieutenant Kevin Murphy found himself leading mixed squads of human Marines and Kaleri warriors through the underground tunnel networks that connected their major cities. The aliens had built these passages as emergency shelters, but they proved perfect for hit-and-run attacks against Vorthan occupation forces. Murphy's combined units could strike without warning and disappear before the enemy could respond. The cultural differences between humans and Kaleri created challenges that Dr. Rebecca Taylor worked constantly to overcome. Her translation protocols were improving, but miscommunication could still get people killed in combat situations. Taylor spent every waking hour refining the language interface while learning to interpret the emotional colors that played across Kaleri's skin. Sergeant Major Carol Bennett discovered that Kaleri warriors fought very differently from humans. Where humans relied on aggression and overwhelming firepower, the aliens used patience and precise coordination to achieve their goals. Bennett learned to blend human shock tactics with Kaleri strategic planning, creating new forms of warfare that confused and frustrated Vorthan commanders. The alien defenders shared their knowledge of Vorthan technology and tactics with their human allies. The Kaleri had been studying their enemies for months, looking for any weakness that might help them survive. They revealed that Vorthan energy shields were vulnerable to rapid frequency changes and that their ground forces relied heavily on centralized command structures. Chief Engineer Santos worked with Kaleri scientists to upgrade human weapon systems using alien energy manipulation techniques. The combination of human engineering pragmatism and Kaleri theoretical knowledge produced devastating new weapon designs. Plasma cannons that could burn through any armor, energy shields that could deflect solid projectiles and communication systems that worked through telepathic enhancement. When the Vorthan fleet finally arrived, War Commander Zethkar broadcast a surrender demand to the human forces. His message was cold and arrogant, offering the humans one chance to withdraw from the system before he destroyed them completely. He claimed that resistance was futile and that human interference in Vorthan affairs would not be tolerated. Admiral Price responded by ordering every human ship to open fire simultaneously. The asteroid belt erupted in violence as hidden weapons platforms revealed themselves and unleashed everything they had at the advancing enemy fleet. Kinetic projectiles, plasma beams, and improvised missiles filled space between the asteroids. While human ships darted in and out of cover like deadly ghosts, the Vorthans had expected to face a conventional fleet engagement, where their superior numbers would guarantee victory. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to stand still and be destroyed. Human ships appeared from behind asteroids, fired devastating volleys, and disappeared before return fire could find them. Every piece of space debris became a potential weapon or hiding place. Zethkar quickly realized that his enemy was more dangerous than he had anticipated. The humans fought with a creativity and ruthlessness that reminded him of his own early campaigns, but they also showed a willingness to sacrifice themselves for others that he found disturbing. When Vorthan forces targeted Kalari refugee camps, human ships would throw themselves into hopeless battles to protect alien civilians. Captain Lee's vengeance led one such desperate charge when Vorthan bombers moved to attack the largest refugee center on Velonis Prime. Lee knew that her dreadnought could not survive a direct assault against such overwhelming odds, but she also knew that thousands of innocent lives hung in the balance. The Vengeance smashed through the Vorthan bomber formation like an avenging angel, her guns blazing until the very end. The destruction of the Vengeance became a rallying cry for human forces throughout the system. Lee's final transmission, broadcast on all frequencies as her ship broke apart under enemy fire, became legendary among both humans and Kalari. Her last words were a promise that humanity would never abandon those who called for help, no matter what the cost. Intelligence Officer Carter intercepted Vorthan communications that revealed their ultimate strategy. Zethkar was calling for reinforcements from the Empire's core worlds, massive fleets that could overwhelm any defense that humans might organize. The transmissions also revealed something else that chilled Carter to the bone. The Vorthans were learning human tactics and adapting their own strategies to counter them. The war was escalating beyond anything that either side had originally planned. What had started as a rescue mission for one alien species was becoming a conflict that would determine the future of this entire region of space. Admiral Price realized that humanity's only hope lay in calling for reinforcements from Earth, even though doing so would reveal the location of human home systems to their enemies. The decision to request help from Earth was not made lightly. Every human officer understood that they might be bringing war to their own people by revealing humanity's location to the Vorthan Empire. But they also knew that the Kalari and dozens of other species would face extinction if the Vorthans were allowed to continue their conquest unchallenged. As Price composed his message to Earth, he looked out at the burning asteroid field where his people continued to fight against impossible odds. Human crews were exhausted, ships were running low on ammunition, and casualties were mounting with each passing hour. But nobody was talking about surrender, and nobody was suggesting retreat. They had come too far and sacrificed too much to give up now. Earth's response to Admiral Price's desperate call for help exceeded every expectation that the battered human fleet had dared to hold. The second wave arrived not as a handful of reinforcement ships, but as the largest military armada that humanity had ever assembled. Admiral Helen Cross, the legendary hero of the Titan War, brought 60 of Earth's most advanced warships along with experimental weapons that pushed the boundaries of human science. Cross had volunteered to lead the relief expedition personally. Despite offers to command from the safety of Earth, her reputation among military personnel was almost mythical. She had never lost a battle, never abandoned an ally, and never accepted defeat even when facing impossible odds. When her fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Velonis system, every human crew member felt their spirits lift for the first time in weeks. The new arrivals brought more than just ships and weapons. Volunteer crews had come from every human colony and outpost, drawn by stories of the desperate fight taking place around an alien world. Miners from the asteroid belt, freight pilots from the outer colonies, and even retired veterans had answered the call. They came because they believed in what their military was trying to accomplish. Admiral Cross took overall command of the combined human forces, while Admiral Price retained tactical control of the original expedition fleet. Together they planned the final assault that would either break Vorthan power in this region of space or result in the complete destruction of human military might. There would be no middle ground and no second chances. The Kalari defenders had managed to establish a telepathic communication network that linked every human ship and ground unit into a single coordinated fighting force. Dr. Amanda Foster worked with alien scientists to create translation protocols that allowed instant communication between species. For the first time in the war, human forces could coordinate their actions with the precision that had always given Kaleri military units their effectiveness. Captain Ryan Cooper prepared the Thunderstrike for what he knew would be the most important battle of his career. His ship bore the scars of every engagement since arriving at Velonis Prime, but his crew had kept her fighting through impossible odds. Chief Engineer Santos had performed miracles with salvaged parts and alien technology, turning the experimental warship into something that even her original designers would not recognize. The final battle began when War Commander Zethkar attempted to break human morale by ramming his command ship directly into the largest Kaleri refugee center on the planet's surface. The massive Vorthan vessel descended through the atmosphere like a falling mountain, its engines screaming defiance as point defense systems tried desperately to stop it. Captain Patricia Lee's replacement, Commander Julie Stevens, threw her newly assigned dreadnought UES Retribution directly into the path of the descending enemy ship. The collision was visible from orbit as two massive vessels met in an explosion that lit up the entire continent. Stevens and her crew died instantly, but their sacrifice saved hundreds of thousands of Kaleri civilians from certain death. The heroic sacrifice triggered a coordinated assault by every human unit in the system. Captain Cooper led a desperate boarding action against Zethkar's secondary command vessel, fighting through corridors filled with Vorthan warriors who had never faced human close combat tactics before. The narrow passages of the alien ship became killing fields, where human training and determination overcame superior numbers. Sergeant Major Carol Bennett found herself holding a critical choke point against 12 Vorthan warriors, while Lieutenant Murphy's demolition team worked to plant charges on the enemy ship's reactor core. Bennett's rifle ran dry after the first few minutes, but she continued fighting with her sidearm and eventually her combat knife. When the demolition charges finally detonated, Bennett was still standing, surrounded by the bodies of enemies who had underestimated human determination. On the planet's surface, Colonel Danny Phillips coordinated the largest joint human Kaleri assault of the entire war. Mixed units of Marines and alien warriors emerged from underground tunnels to attack Vorthan command posts throughout the occupied territories. The telepathic coordination allowed perfect timing as hundreds of simultaneous strikes overwhelmed enemy forces across multiple continents. Lieutenant Kevin Murphy led a combined assault team through the ruins of the Kaleri capital city toward the main Vorthan command bunker. His troops moved with the fluid precision of a single organism, human aggression perfectly balanced with Kaleri strategic planning. When they reached their target, the enemy defenders found themselves facing an attack that came from 6 directions. At once, Dr. Foster negotiated the formal alliance between humanity and the Kaleri collective while the final battles raged around them. The agreement she hammered out would serve as the foundation for the first interstellar coalition government, with humans providing military protection in exchange for Kaleri scientific knowledge and telepathic coordination abilities. The war's end came suddenly when Zethkar's flagship suffered catastrophic damage from Captain Cooper's boarding action. With their supreme commander dead and his command structure shattered, the remaining Vorthan forces began to retreat toward their home territories. Some ships surrendered rather than face certain destruction, while others fled in disorder that human pursuers ruthlessly exploited. Admiral Cross chose not to pursue the retreating enemy beyond the borders of the Velonis system. Her forces had won a complete victory, but they were also exhausted and operating far from any supply base. The important thing was that the Vorthan threat to this region had been broken and that the Kaleri people had been saved from extinction. The months following the battle were filled with reconstruction efforts that brought humans and Kaleri together in ways that war alone could never have accomplished. Joint construction teams rebuilt the damaged cities using a combination of human engineering techniques and Kaleri biotechnology. The results were more beautiful and functional than anything either species had created alone. Dr. Rebecca Taylor established language schools where humans learned Kaleri musical communication while aliens studied human written languages. The cultural exchange programs that grew from these schools would eventually spread to dozens of other species as news of the human Kaleri alliance spread throughout the galaxy. Colonel Phillips took charge of training the first integrated military units, with human officers learning to work alongside Kaleri tactical coordinators. The combination of human fighting spirit and alien strategic precision created military formations that were far more effective than either species could field alone. These joint units would become the backbone of coalition defense forces. 6 months after the final battle, Commander Jake Harrison arrived at Velonis Prime, aboard a new monitoring station that would serve as the forward headquarters for human intelligence operations. Harrison had been promoted repeatedly since his discovery of the original Kaleri distress signal, but he preferred field assignments to desk jobs. His new mission was to coordinate the intelligence network that was already spreading throughout this region of space. The reputation of human military prowess had spread far beyond the Velonis system. Alien species throughout the local stellar neighborhood were sending diplomatic missions to request human military assistance against various threats. Some faced Vorthan retaliation attacks, while others were dealing with pirates, slavers, or aggressive neighbors. All of them had heard that humans were warriors who protected the innocent. Captain Cooper, now bearing the scars of his boarding action against Zethkar's command ship, stood on the bridge of the rebuilt Thunderstrike and looked out at the stars. His ship was stationed permanently at Velonis Prime as part of the Joint Defense Force, but he knew that humanity's greatest adventure was just beginning. Somewhere out there were other species calling for help, other battles to be fought, and other worlds to be protected. The children of both species played together in the rebuilt cities of Velonis Prime, their laughter echoing through parks where human and Kaleri families shared picnics under alien skies. Above them, joint patrol fleets moved through space in formations that would have been impossible before the war. The galaxy was changing, and humanity had found its role as the protectors of those who could not protect themselves.